Welcome to Dharma Talk. My name is Matthew Sokolov, and I am the founding teacher here at One Mind Dharma. And this week you just have me. I think next week Elizabeth will be on here with me with the topic she's bringing. So just to get a few of the kind of announcement things out of the way, you can visit oneminddharma.com/talk to learn a little bit more about this podcast. You can subscribe via email, find the YouTube link. We're now live on iTunes, so that link is up there. And we should be live up in the Google Podcasts and Stitcher and all the other podcast stores, either by the time this comes out or shortly thereafter. And I'll put the links on the page once I have them. There's also a link there, or a button rather, to support the podcast. I don't do this because meditation makes me financially rich, as I'm sure you can imagine, but it is nice to have the support to cover the cost of the podcast. And just to be upfront, our website hosting, because we have so much traffic and the visitors from our podcast, runs about $200 a month. Our email lists run about $100 a month because we have quite a few people on them. And then, of course, the little additional costs of having to hire people to fix things every once in a while, all the little services and paid plugins we use. And we're run pretty much based on donations. So there's a button there to support the podcast. Anything helps. We'd always rather have you than your money. And money will be the topic tonight, so we'll dive more into that in a little bit. Speaking of money and ways I make money, one way I make money is through my book I recently published. And you can find out more about it at oneminddharma.com/book. It was a journey, to say the least, to write, but I think the final product came out really wonderful and helpful. The Amazon page has gotten a lot of reviews. We've gotten a lot of emails from different people, so if you're one of those people, keep emailing. As you know, I try to respond to pretty much every single email I receive. And I actually had a great story happen the other day. My aunt-in-law, my wife's aunt, works at a big law firm, in Washington, D.C., and not necessarily what you would think of a mindfulness or meditation crowd. And she had the book on her bookshelf behind her, and someone else she works with came in and says, "Oh, you've read that book? I just got it, and I absolutely love it." And she said, "Oh, no way, that's my nephew-in-law." So it's just great to hear that, the book's helping people and they're enjoying it. oneminddharma.com/book. Any feedback you have on it, or any questions, or anything you want me to elaborate on, you're always welcome to reach out. And as always, if you have a question you want us to answer on air, or not, just a personal question you want us to not answer on air, you can email me at matthew@oneminddharma.com. If it is something you want kept between us, please let me know in the email, just so I don't violate the privacy. Usually if somebody asks a question via email, I will directly ask if it's okay if I share it on air, and usually I'll keep it anonymous. So there's kind of the boring stuff out of the way. I don't know how boring, well, shouldn't say that. There's the announcements out of the way. And today I wanted to talk about money and I guess our relationship to it. And this stems from a little bit from my own experience recently, over the past year. And we've received a couple questions about it. And of course, we get emails once a month at least of people saying, how can you, sell your daily guided meditations? That's not Dharma, and it's supposed to be offered freely. And I'll speak to that because I do partially agree, frankly. But I'll speak to that here in a moment. So as I often do, I broke up my talk into just a couple different pieces. One, and it's going to be short, is just kind of the Dharma. What did the Buddha and what does Buddhism actually say about money? And then I want to really briefly touch on this Dharma for money and meditation for money kind of movement that's happening in the West. And that'll just be a brief kind of jumping off point for you to investigate for yourself, I would say. And then we'll spend some time talking about what it actually looks like to investigate our relationship with money. So first, and the way I've received it is, why does Buddhism think money is bad or evil? It doesn't. I don't know why people think that entirely. I can kind of understand that, the image of Buddhists is that they don't like money. So I wanted to start actually from a sutta. And this is the Buddha speaking. If a person is getting rich, he should get 5 benefits. A man who gets rich by hard work and lawful way makes himself happy and glad. He can also make his parents, his wife, children, and servants happy, glad by his wealth. He can make his friends and companions happy, glad. Ill luck is warded off, and he keeps his goods in safety. He makes the 5 offerings to kin, guests, spirit, kings, and deities. He can make offerings to all those recluses and good men who abstain from pride and indolence, who bear all things in patience and humility, each mastering self, each calming self, each perfecting self. Now, if the wealth of that person, after paying attention to these 5 reasons, come to destruction, let him consider thus: at least I've paid attention to those reasons for getting rich, but my wealth has gone, and thus he is not upset. And if his wealth increase, let him think, truly I've paid attention to those reasons, and my wealth has grown. Thus he is not upset in either case. So the Buddha is speaking here to benefits of actually having money. If you listen to my Dharma talks or sit with us in the online group, you know I kind of make this disclaimer all the time, but I think it's important to name, especially for people new to the path and practice. Many of the suttas and kind of Buddhism at its foundation is what I would call misogynistic. So the language is always about men practicing or getting rich, and just the language of his wife, children, servants, happy. I don't mean to excuse it or dismiss it. I think it's important to name and to recognize. I also think it's worth noting that it was a product of the time. And just as anything with mindfulness, it's our responsibility to see it clearly, to recognize it, and to work with it and see how we can maybe change that trajectory of the Dharma in modern times. I'll take a little sidebar. I'm actually in the middle of recording a whole new course. It's going to have like 4 or 5 hours of videos. And it's an introduction to Buddhism. And one of the talks I'm giving that I decided to include was the Dharma and women and the role in Dharma over history, because it's a rich history of oppression, subjugation, lack of fairness. That's not really the best way to put it. And it is quite interesting, and I think something we do need to know and not deny about this path. So anyways, back to the money. The Buddha obviously here isn't saying money is bad. He's actually offering ways that money can lead to benefits. There's another sutta in which the Buddha says, if a man has acquired wealth by energetic striving, by his strength, won by sweat, and lawfully gotten, there are these 4 kinds of happiness to be won by the householder. So the householder meaning not a monk. There's the happiness of ownership, the happiness of wealth, the happiness of debtlessness, and the happiness of blamelessness. And he goes on to actually explain what these mean. The happiness of ownership is knowing that we worked hard for it. So not like the ownership of having the money, but we've all had that feeling of working hard and then actually having something to show for it and knowing that we worked for it. It feels completely different to get something, to have money given to us, say, than it does to earn it. The happiness of wealth is described as the ability to be able to be generous, to engage in meritorious deeds. So when we have wealth, we're able to kind of take care of others and support the Sangha or support loved ones, and how meritorious that is. The happiness of debtlessness is pretty self-explanatory. He does mention that not owing anyone, small or large. And the happiness of blamelessness is speaking to this piece of lawfully gotten money, so not, engaging in unwise livelihood. So wealth, in a financial sense, can lead to happiness and these forms of joy for the layperson. It also can lead to a great amount of suffering, and I think that almost seems silly to mention because I don't know your experience listening to this, but I think we've all suffered around money in some shape, way, or form. The other thing that's interesting is monks don't handle money. Neither monks nor nuns traditionally, especially in Theravada schools, handle any money. They kind of live off the economy of generosity. Tanjef or Thanissaro Bhikkhu calls it an economy of gifts. The lay people give the gift of food and shelter. They kind of handle the money in many cases at the monasteries. And the monks give the gift of Dharma, of the teachings. They don't have to worry about making money. The last thing I want to mention, and this is a super brief overview, of course, about the Dharma and money, is the topic of livelihood and how we actually earn our money. I wrote a post about this a while ago. It's at oneminddharma.com/livelihood. But wise livelihood or right livelihood is one of the factors of the Eightfold Path, right next to action and speech as far as ethics go. And the general rule is that we don't earn money in a way that causes harm to others. And that's extremely oversimplifying it. But it's worth noting that this is the Buddha's instruction on right livelihood, to not cause harm how we make our money. Specifically, the Buddha says a lay follower should not engage in 5 types of business. Which 5? Business in weapons, business in human beings, business in meat, business in intoxicants, and business in poison. He also says about livelihood and kind of what we do with our money, a householder knowing his income and expenses leads a balanced life, neither extravagant nor miserly, knowing that thus his income will stand in excess of his expenses, but not his expenses in excess of his income. And that's from the Anguttara Nikaya. So I'm just going to read that last part one more time. His income, knowing that thus his income will stand in excess of his expenses, but not his expenses in excess of his income. So the instruction here is to, keep a budget, balance your stuff, don't go into debt. If you're already in debt, like I am, try not to go further into debt if possible. So these are the kind of a few traditional teachings on money. I just want to point out that money's not inherently bad in Buddhism. The reason monks don't handle money is to avoid things which can be distracting or lead to craving and clinging. Many of the Vinaya, the monks' rules, are just there to kind of create a community and a set of conditions that are conducive to awakening. I actually think in the bigger picture, not handling money at all is the easier route. We don't really have to suffer as much. Also, just want to name that many of these are, as we read them, they can be idealistic or privileged even. The Buddha's talking about happiness that comes to people who have wealth. Well, not all of us have the opportunity to really have wealth. A lay follower should not engage in 5 types of business. I'm not going to be up on my moral high ground, but yeah, I don't think we should engage in weapons. Business in human beings, selling human beings there's really no arguing that one, in my opinion. Meat, intoxicants, and poisons are tough ones. I know someone who's a dear friend who who does business related to marijuana, and they're a great person, they're a compassionate person, they're a loving person. And it's their decision and they're aware of it. They're a Dharma student as well. And it's interesting. It's not really mine to judge, but it is interesting to hear this person talk about it and discuss it. And they're very open about it and keep it as an open investigation. But it's a it's a job that this person had before he came to Dharma and can't really afford to give it up. So there's that. It is kind of rooted in privilege. Even the last sutta I read, there have been times in my life where I haven't had the opportunity to have my income stand in excess of my expenses. So just recognizing that this doesn't mean we have to be perfect. So I want to share just a little bit about the relation of Dharma and money. The Buddha did teach that the Dharma should always be offered freely in this kind of economy of generosity. And it's why when we had the meditation center in Northern California, which is still open and under the name Mindful Petaluma, every single thing was donation based. This was to not have money be a hindrance for people to come. Everyone was welcome. On the other hand, if we do a retreat, for example, we need to pay for the retreat space. So there's some overhead cost. We charge in those instances to make our money back. I think it's important to understand or to look at something I've looked at in my own life and with my own teachers is if it feels like the teacher's just doing something for money or the center or the path you're following, and that doesn't sit right with you, then maybe something worth investigating. On the other hand, I've seen kind of the numbers behind retreats, for example, with Against the Stream at Joshua Tree. I know that the running those retreats is so expensive, and although the registration fees are expensive, and there's lots of donations coming in, nobody's really walking away wealthy from those. As far as our guided meditations go, we offer a lot of free meditations, a weekly meditation podcast, a YouTube channel that we do make some money from ad revenue before and after the meditations. But we try to make it, and the podcast also comes via email, try to make it as accessible for free as possible. The daily meditations is just, sometimes we have to ask for money to cover our costs. Those meditations, because of our email list, cost us $100 or so a month just to run. So there's a fine line there, and it's worth investigating and questioning, because I do believe that the Dharma should largely be offered freely, and money should not ever be the hindrance that prevents someone from practicing. So with that, I want to kind of just offer a brief overview of my experience with money. And this is brief. I'm not going to go over, I was born. I've never really been super great with money my whole life. I've never really been financially stable, or what I would call that. I did, and as did Elizabeth, we both grew up in what I would call upper middle class families who were very financially stable, all things considered. And we also have that kind of looming, that safety of privilege of knowing that, like, if stuff just totally hit the fan and we ran through our savings, that we do have family with some money that, I don't want to say they bail us out for sure, but there's some security there. We haven't had to do that, but knowing that it's there, I think, impacts relationship with money and the kind of privilege that goes along with it. So that being said, money's caused a lot of stress in my life mostly, and in Elizabeth's as well, kind of by proxy, but mostly my life. And I've talked about this a lot, but the way that looked was I was working. Elizabeth was in school full time. She was working her butt off. She went through undergrad at UCLA and then at Loyola Marymount and then graduate school. And she did it all in, I think, like 5 years. So obviously much shorter than you should be doing that. She was really working hard. And during that time, especially during the end, she was even busier. She taught meditation at a treatment center. She ran the One Mind Dharma Center with me. Actually, I ran it with her. She did most of the work. She had an internship or traineeship for her psychology or counseling degree. And she was working on building a private practice. So she was, crazy busy, and I was crazy busy. I was trying to run One Mind Dharma. I had a marketing company called Mindful Marketing, which still exists today. I taught meditation at the center, and I had a bunch of little projects and companies I work for, and just a ton of different things. But no matter what we did living in Northern California, we just didn't ever seem to have stability as far as money goes. Our cost of living was quite expensive. We had some debt from years before on credit cards and medical bills. And I was constantly stressed. Like every month we didn't have any savings, and every month it was worrying if we were going to have enough money to make rent. And there were times we actually didn't. We had to wait for a check to come in, and luckily our landlords were just super kind people. And I would send them a text like near the end of the month, like, "Hey, rent's gonna be instead of the first, I'm gonna pay it on the 7th this month, just because I'm waiting for a check." And they would be like, "Cool, thanks for letting me know." Always stressed around money, not a healthy relationship. So I think, as most of the listeners or followers of the blog know, in October of 2000, on October 1st, 2018, Elizabeth and I, my wife and I, moved to Mexico. We sold a bunch of our things and put a bunch of things in storage, and made a decision to move to the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, the state of Quintana Roo. And we did this for several reasons, but one of the big ones was to reduce stress, to have a lifestyle change. The costs kind of vary. Obviously, moving was quite expensive, but in general, it's about a third of the price to live down here. Your money goes a lot farther, of course, as I'm sure many can imagine, than it does in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we're able to live a pretty, nice life now. We live in a nice area. It's a beautiful green, jungly area. We're super close to the beach, the beautiful Caribbean, and we're able to afford some things, to take some things off our plate. Like, we don't do our own laundry. We have someone come pick it up and they do it and drop it off. And we have groceries delivered because we don't have a car, which is super nice. Anyways, so we moved down here for many reasons, but one of them was to really reduce the stress of always having to work. And now Lizzie's actually the primary breadwinner. She's working full time for a company and has her private practice going. And I've been able to work a little bit less and stress a little bit less to make my money with One Mind Dharma and have some marketing clients still. I do day trading with Forex or foreign exchange currencies. And overall, we're able to work a lot less. Money is not a worry in the same way that it was. And that's what we were going after. Was we looked at the biggest stressor in our life was money. And the biggest thing that made us happy was spending time together. And we made a change that, allowed us to do that. However, it's slightly aversive, right? We instead of fixing our relationship with money, we picked up and moved and just kind of ran away from it. And we've had, I've kind of had that discussion with Elizabeth, and of course in my own head, of like, oh, were you just running from a problem instead of facing it? Again, going back to the privilege of what the Buddha was saying, we didn't have the opportunity to save where we lived. We didn't have the opportunity to experience wealth. And we, frankly, being realistic, didn't see an end in sight for ourselves of that cycle. So I like to think that we actually saw how much suffering was being created by the financial instability. Another piece was we connected, and I'll speak for myself, I was connecting my value, self-value so much to how much money I was making, what my job was or work was, what kind of education I have, right? These are common questions people ask in the United States. What do you do for work? And people are kind of sizing you up. And I don't think it's just the United States. I frankly, that's the only English-speaking country I've ever lived in. So I don't know if it's similar in Canada or England or maybe even Germany or wherever. But I do know that we often size people up based on what they do for work and what their education is and how much money they make. And we do it internally too. I think it's created from society. the piece there is that we're creating a sense of self. We're creating an identity around this money piece. And I was experiencing this everywhere I went. There was kind of this part of me weighing on my shoulders or sitting on my back of, man, I don't know if I have enough money to get through the month. And I feel like a failure, or, I feel like not a good provider to Elizabeth, who's in school, and I promised to support her and whatnot. And the ego and all these things that go along with it. So that's my story. Now it's a little different. Elizabeth makes most of the money, and I don't. And that's socially a bit weird. However, I'm perfectly okay with it. It is uncomfortable at times where I don't feel like a provider, or I meet other young men my age who are working full time, and their significant other is maybe a parent, or maybe they have a job as well, or maybe they're pursuing something. And it does feel there is some kind of old school classical gender roles piece there. But overall, we've changed our relationship to money, and that's what matters. So I think one of the places we can jump off with this is how do we relate to money, and how we kind of, what our relationship is with it, is what identity are we building with our relationship to money? I said, one of the first things I said when I started my story was I've never really been great with money. So we built these stories like right off the bat. When I say, what are you like with money? A whole kind of plethora of stories come up of how you are with money. Maybe you save every little bit. Maybe you spend too much on frivolous things, you feel like. Maybe you have a lot of money for someone your age because you worked hard. Maybe you've been given a lot of money by family. Maybe you got lucky and won the lottery. But we build these kind of identities and tell these stories so much. They're often rooted in judgment and comparison. And I would argue that money is really just a small portion of our identities. We make it such a big deal sometimes, and it happens in different ways too. Like when I'm experiencing anger, my mind says, oh, you're always an angry person, and the whole identity gets built up around it. But with money especially, we can really build a sense of identity around it. Money often dictates our social circles, the opportunities we have or don't have, especially, at least in my experience in the United States. It can dictate things like what kind of education we get, where we're born or raised. And it can dictate the things like how we look, or how we dress, or how we come across. So it makes sense that we build this kind of sense of identity around it. I think it's important to recognize that the way that we build an identity around our relationship with money isn't always directly money related. Sometimes it's more related to our education, and the education we were able to afford or able to afford for our kids. So I would offer the question, can you find value or sense of value in yourself somewhere else than how much money you make? Maybe in the amount of love or compassion you have, the friendships you've built. And I don't want to be too cheesy. Like, I know money makes the world go round and we need it to pay bills. But if we're going to take out that sense of self-value, it can be kind of rocky and destabilizing. So it can be useful to kind of fill it in with another way we can find self-value. I also would encourage, even if you're good with money or identify as that, to investigate a new way to relate to money. Maybe that means saving a little bit more. Maybe it means being a little bit more generous. Maybe it simply means bringing awareness to your relationship with money. And I'll talk about that at the end. But just entertaining the idea that, can I have a different relationship with money, whatever that looks like? Even if you're struggling to pay each bill, or like I do often in my life, I'm not going to be able to pay all my bills this month. Which ones should I pay, and which ones should I skip, and whatnot? Even if you're in that position, just investigating the suffering around it. If it's something you can't avoid and you're doing everything you can, the suffering around it is often that second arrow, that just kind of beating ourselves up. I want to pause for a quote from Ajahn Chah. Just consider we came to possess a very expensive object. The minute that thing comes into our possession, our mind changes. Where can I keep it? If I leave it there, somebody might steal it. We worry ourselves into a state trying to find a place to keep it. And when did the mind change? It changed the minute we obtained the object. Suffering arose right then. No matter where we leave that object, we can't relax. We're left with trouble. Whether sitting, walking, or lying down, we're lost in worry. And we've all had that with money or possessions or maybe people. I felt like that when I got Carol, our little puppy. But I think it's important to begin to investigate the way money and the ways we spend our money create suffering. The way we do this is through mindfulness practice. And we talked last week about awareness and recognition in these two separate pieces. And I think that this is especially true for this. We can recognize or bring awareness, rather, to when we're suffering around money or even having any relationship with money, even if it's we're responding calmly to money. Bring awareness to when we're spending money or when we're choosing not to spend money. And recognize how useful or wholesome this is. Is where we're spending our money leading to liberation or leading to suffering? Are we cultivating freedom, or are we kind of cultivating and watering the seeds of desire and greed? How useful is the spending? If we have a huge savings, how useful is the saving? Maybe we can support someone who needs it. There have been many studies that support that we remember experiences more fondly than things. So are we spending our money on things we think will make us happy? Maybe switch to spending money on experiences with loved ones. The core of this is just the awareness and the recognition. The awareness that we're spending money and the recognition of if it's leading to liberation or to suffering. So that kind of wraps up my basic thoughts on money and some ways we can work with it. And I know a lot was said and it kind of seems not pragmatic at times. So I just want to really reiterate this piece that money is not evil. The Buddha didn't say money was evil. But we can look at our relationship to money and the way that it's causing suffering. And the specific things we can look at are when we're spending money, recognizing if it's leading to suffering or liberation, how we earn money, and perhaps if we can change our relationship to money or begin to investigate it, entertaining the idea of a different way to interact with it. So with that, we have one question to go into for the week. And this was a great question that I love, and it was received via Facebook. And we don't get a lot of questions on Facebook, as our Facebook page isn't super active. But I loved this question and wanted to really address it. What's the difference between Vadhana and liking or disliking? And just a little bit of background for those of you that don't know what Vadhana is. It's the second establishment of mindfulness or foundation of mindfulness. And it's the feeling tone, whether an experience we're having is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So we'll just say a sound for argument's sake. Let's say we're sitting in meditation or going about our daily life and we hear a car go by. That's the sound or experience. And with that experience is Vadhana. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. There also may be a piece of liking or disliking the experience. So there is a difference between the Vadhana or feeling tone and the liking or disliking. Vedana is not inherent, of course. The sound of a car, for example, is not inherently pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. But Vedana is not a reaction in the same way that liking and disliking is. or are rather. I think one of the best illustrations of this is with physical sensations in the body, and I'll use an unpleasant one and a pleasant one. So let's say you're sitting in meditation and you have a tightness or soreness in the knee, and it comes into your awareness and it's unpleasant. That Vedana or unpleasantness is actually in the knee itself, right? That's where it feels unpleasant. The disliking or aversion that comes up is in the mind. So we can see that the Vedana is at the sense door, whereas the liking and disliking is more reactive. We can also think of the feeling of taking a deep breath and how pleasant it can feel. That pleasantness is in the, let's say, chest in this moment, whereas the liking of it is in the mind. It's how we relate to it. So it's perhaps easiest to see and understand with the body, but it's the same for other sense doors. When we taste something, the pleasantness is at the tongue where we're tasting it. The liking it is in the mind or elsewhere in the body. Same with smells, with sights. We see something pleasant or unpleasant. And the same with sounds. We hear something as a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and then we like or dislike it. The place where it can be rather hard to see is with the sixth sense door in Buddhism of the thinking mind, the thoughts. So it's the same with thoughts, and I really encourage, this is a great question to, really ponder. And my encouragement would be to really investigate it for yourself. What's the difference between the Vedana, the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and the liking or disliking or response? Can we separate the two and see how the two feel different? So that's it. It's our one question that I wanted to address. It's a great question, and I really wanted to share it because I think it can be an insightful practice to really look at how these two things differ. So just our little closing announcements. You can visit oneminddharma.com/talk to, I always say learn more about this podcast, but there's really not a ton to learn. You can visit it to subscribe via email, get the YouTube channel if you want to listen on YouTube, and find the links for iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, those kinds of things if you listen to podcasts on a certain app. There's also a button to support this podcast and help it run on donations. If you have any questions, you can email me at matthew@oneminddharma.com. If you have a question about something I said or thought, the kind of questions portions doesn't always have to be questions. If you have anything to share, we're happy to kind of use it as a jumping off point for the greater investigation. Or if you have a topic you want us to cover as the main topic. The last thing I want to throw out there is our online groups are going strong. It's been a wonderful way to connect with the community. We've had quite a few weeks where there's like 3 of us or 4 of us. And recently there's been closer to maybe 6 or 7 of us, and it's been really beautiful. So you can learn, those are all donation based as well. They're at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. And you can get those at class.oneminddharma.com. That's class as in school, class.oneminddharma.com. You can also, if you're on Facebook, search One Mind Dharma Meditation Group. We live stream into that group. If you want to follow along the meditation and kind of the talk portion, it's a great way to go if you don't feel like participating one night. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful week. And we will be back next week with another episode of Dharma Talk.